My sister posted a picture of my packed bags on Instagram for all of Atlanta to see. The caption read, "The 31-year-old leech is finally gone, and I am no longer cooking for my unemployed sister." Within an hour, it had over 1,400 likes. My own family laughed as they threw me out into a thunderstorm, handing me a crumpled $100 bill like a beggar. I just smiled like the post and walked out into the rain. They had absolutely no idea they had just evicted the woman who secretly owned the very roof over their heads. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The sharp sound of my suitcase zipper echoed through the grand hallway of our family estate in Buckhead. I packed the last of my silk blouses, moving with a calm precision that seemed to infuriate the people standing behind me. Aaliyah, my 28-year-old sister, leaned against the mahogany doorframe, holding her phone high in the air. She threw her head back and laughed, a bright artificial sound she reserved for country club dinners and social media videos. "Listen to this one," she announced, her manicured fingers scrolling down her glowing screen. Aunt Brenda just commented, "Remember when Sienna cried at 22 because KFC rejected her application, and she is still unemployed? What an absolute tragedy." Aaliyah giggled, leaning into the shoulder of her husband Connor. Connor, a 30-year-old finance broker with perfectly styled hair and an arrogant smirk, wrapped his arm around her waist and snickered. "Honestly," Aaliyah, Connor said, his voice dripping with that familiar condescension he always directed at me, "your parents should have started charging her rent 5 years ago. I cannot believe you all let her freeload in this mansion while the rest of us are actually building wealth and contributing to society. It is exhausting having to support someone who brings absolutely nothing to the table." I closed my suitcase and stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored trousers. I did not raise my voice or defend myself against the white man lecturing me about wealth inside my own childhood home. I simply turned to face my father Harrison, who was standing at the bottom of the sweeping staircase with his arms crossed over his chest. He wore his golf attire, radiating the self-righteous authority of a retired bank executive who cared more about his country club reputation than his eldest daughter. Harrison marched up the remaining stairs and stopped inches from my face. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $100 bill, and threw it at my chest. The paper fluttered pathetically to the hardwood floor. "Take a taxi," he sneered, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Ever since the day you sat in the kitchen sobbing over failing that fast food management test 9 years ago, I knew you would never carry this family legacy. You are a stain on our name, Sienna. A woman with no drive, no career, and no class. You embarrass your mother and me every time we have to explain why our eldest daughter is still living in her childhood bedroom. Do not call us when you run out of cash." My mother Valerie stood just behind him, clutching her pearl necklace and nodding in agreement. She looked at me not with a mother's love, but with pure social embarrassment. "You need to learn how the real world works, Sienna," she said coldly. "Aaliyah and Connor have a beautiful life because they work hard. You cannot just expect us to carry your dead weight forever." I looked down at the $100 bill resting near my designer heels. I thought about the irony of their accusations. They were lecturing me about hard work and freeloading, completely blind to the reality of their own financial survival. They loved performing black excellence for their church friends and society galas, pretending their wealth was infinite and unshakable. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream or beg or try to justify my existence to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened Instagram and navigated directly to Aaliyah's public page. I watched the engagement numbers climb on the photo of my luggage. 1,467 likes. I tapped the screen and liked the post myself. I scrolled down to Aunt Brenda's nasty comment about my past failures and liked that too. I even found a comment from my ex-boyfriend Trey saying he had dodged a bullet, and I made sure to like his miserable addition to the pile. Then I slipped my phone back into my pocket and picked up the handle of my suitcase. I walked past my father, ignoring his crumpled money on the floor. I stopped directly in front of Connor, matching his arrogant gaze with absolute icy stillness. "Keep enjoying this house, Connor," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Keep enjoying it for as long as you possibly can." Connor scoffed, rolling his eyes, but a flicker of confusion crossed his face. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on all of them and walked out the heavy oak front doors into the pouring rain. The storm was thrashing against the pavement, soaking my clothes instantly, but the cold water felt like a baptism. "Good luck at the homeless shelter," Aaliyah yelled from the dry safety of the porch, her voice carrying over the thunder. I kept walking down the long, circular driveway, my head held high. Just as her cruel laughter rang out again, twin headlights pierced the heavy sheets of rain, cutting through the darkness of the storm, waiting for my arrival. Through the torrential downpour, a sleek custom black Mercedes Maybach glided silently up the winding driveway of the estate. The tires hissed against the wet pavement, coming to a smooth stop right at the edge of the porch steps, where the rain met the marble. The imposing luxury of the vehicle completely dwarfed my father's prized luxury sedan parked nearby. I could feel the sudden shift in the atmosphere behind me. The cruel laughter that had been echoing from the doorway abruptly ceased. I turned my head just slightly to see the expressions on their faces. My father, Harrison, stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, his posture of absolute authority completely shattering in real time. Aaliyah lowered her phone, her eyes wide with shock, trying to comprehend what she was looking at. Connor, who just moments ago had been sneering about my supposed poverty, stepped forward out of the shadow of the doorway, staring at the vehicle with a mixture of confusion and naked envy. The doors of the house remained open, but the absolute silence from my family was deafening over the sound of the rain. The driver's side door of the Maybach opened, and a man dressed in an impeccable tailored charcoal suit stepped out into the storm. He moved with a crisp military precision, entirely unbothered by the severe weather. He opened a large black umbrella and walked briskly around the front of the luxury vehicle, coming to a stop directly in front of me. He completely ignored the stunned audience standing on the porch above us, shielding me entirely from the freezing rain with the umbrella. The water ran off the edges of the canopy, creating a private, quiet space between us, while my family watched in absolute disbelief from the dry porch, unable to process the scene unfolding right in their own driveway. The driver reached out with a gloved hand and took my heavy suitcase effortlessly, sliding it into the spacious trunk of the Maybach. He then stepped over to the rear passenger door and pulled it open, revealing the pristine cream-colored leather interior, illuminated by the soft, ambient lighting of the cabin. "Good evening, boss," he said, his voice clear and professional, carrying easily over the sound of the storm. "The acquisitions you requested have been finalized, and the board is awaiting your arrival at the penthouse." I nodded to him, feeling the immense weight of the past 3 decades finally washing away in the rain. I turned around one last time to face the people who had just thrown me out like garbage. My father took a stumbling step forward into the rain, his golf shoes getting soaked, his eyes darting frantically between me and the uniformed driver. "Sienna," he stammered, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogant power. "What is this? Whose car is this?" I did not answer him. I simply looked down at the driveway. The crumpled $100 bill he had thrown at my chest had blown down the steps and was now floating pathetically in a muddy puddle near my feet. The ink was bleeding into the dirty water, a perfect representation of his hollow conditional love. I stepped right over it without a second glance. I slid into the luxurious back seat of the Maybach, settling into the soft leather as the heated seats immediately began to warm away the chill of the storm. The driver closed the heavy door with a solid thud, cutting off the sounds of the rain, and my family's panicked, confused voices. Through the tinted rain-streaked window, I watched as Connor rushed to the edge of the porch. His face pale, his arrogant finance bro facade completely dissolving into a look of pure bewilderment. He grabbed Aaliyah's arm, pointing at the license plate of the car, trying to figure out how the sister-in-law he had just mocked for being unemployed was leaving in a vehicle worth more than his entire annual salary. My mother Valerie was clutching her chest, staring at the departing car as if she had just seen a ghost. The engine purred to life, incredibly quiet, but undeniably powerful. As the Maybach slowly pulled away from the curb and navigated down the long driveway, leaving my toxic family standing on the porch in the freezing downpour, I did not look back again. They had made their choice, and I was finally making mine. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the car, the soundproof privacy partition rolled up smoothly, separating me from the driver. The ambient lighting shifted to a calming blue, and I let out a long breath, releasing the final remnants of the girl who had cried over a fast food rejection 9 years ago. I reached into the center console and pulled out my secure encrypted tablet. The screen illuminated my face, displaying a complex dashboard of global financial markets, real estate portfolios, and corporate acquisitions. I was not an unemployed failure hiding in my childhood bedroom. I was the anonymous founder and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, a ruthless and highly successful private equity firm known for aggressively taking over failing businesses and distressed luxury real estate across the country. I had spent the last several years building a massive financial empire entirely under the radar, while letting my family believe I was doing nothing with my life. The notification light on the tablet began to flash and the secure line chimed through the car's audio system. I pressed the screen to accept the call. The voice of my lead attorney filled the quiet cabin, sounding incredibly satisfied. "Good evening, Miss Williams," my lawyer said respectfully. "I am calling to confirm that we have successfully acquired the debt portfolios you requested this afternoon. The paperwork is fully signed and secured. We now completely own Connor's commercial business loans, which are currently in severe default. And more importantly, we have also successfully purchased the secret second mortgage your parents took out on their estate. We hold all the cards now. What are your orders?" The next morning, the sun broke through the storm clouds, casting a brilliant golden glow over the massive Atlanta skyline. I sat in the floor-to-ceiling glass living room of my Buckhead penthouse, wrapping a heavy silk robe tighter around my shoulders. My phone rested on the cold marble kitchen island, buzzing continuously with an endless stream of notifications. It had only been 24 hours since Ayalea posted that photo of my packed luggage out in the rain, but day one of my absence had already turned into a massive public spectacle for the city's upper echelon. The post had gone completely viral within the tight-knit circles of Atlanta's Black elite. The engagement metrics were skyrocketing as the local country club members and prominent churchgoers treated my supposed downfall like a weekend sporting event. My phone chimed again, and I picked it up to see a flood of new messages from my cousin Marcus, the only relative who had ever seen past my parents' deeply toxic facade. Marcus was quietly forwarding me dozens of screenshots from a new private family group chat that Aunt Brenda had created late last night. She had predictably excluded me from it, but the title of the chat was loudly visible in the screenshots the freeloaders exit. I swiped through the digital images, watching my own blood relatives roast me with absolute glee. Aunt Brenda had kicked things off with a long, aggressive paragraph about how she always knew I lacked the sophisticated drive required to be a successful Williams woman. She claimed I was a pathetic cautionary tale for the younger cousins, a sad example of what happens when you refuse to hustle and expect handouts. Ayalea responded quickly with rows of laughing emojis, bragging about how much extra space they had now that my cheap clothes were finally out of the guest room. Connor chimed in right after, talking about how my departure would finally stop dragging down the aesthetic of their property value. I read their cruel jokes and blatant disrespect while looking out over the sprawling city I practically owned. They were laughing loudly in a group chat, completely unaware that the silent woman they were mocking held the absolute keys to their entire financial existence. I refreshed Ayalea's public Instagram page, watching the comment section swell to well over 200 responses. The sheer volume of wealthy people reveling in my fabricated misery was astonishing. But it was my mother Valerie's comment that truly captured the massive depth of their shared delusion. Pinned right at the top of the feed for all of her wealthy church friends and charity gala acquaintances to see was a carefully crafted paragraph of pure, manipulative fiction. Valerie wrote a lengthy, deeply passive-aggressive prayer about the burdens of tough love and the necessity of maintaining strict family standards. She publicly thanked God for blessing her with a daughter like Aaliah and a son-in-law like Connor, praising their supposed financial success and their beautiful, flawless marriage. She wrote extensively about how hard it was for a mother to watch her eldest daughter refuse to apply herself in the real world, but declared that Aaliah and Connor's incredible achievements in the competitive finance sector were the true pillars of the Williams family legacy. She was blatantly using my public humiliation to save face, desperately trying to project an unbreakable image of Black excellence to her judgmental peers. Valerie wanted the entire world to believe that she was a long-suffering, saintly mother who had generously housed a lazy child while constantly celebrating her golden daughter and her highly successful white son-in-law. Reading her hollow words, I felt a cold, heavy detachment settle completely over me. My mother was ruthlessly prioritizing her fragile social standing over the reality of what happened in that freezing driveway. She was publicly praising Connor, a man who actively mocked her own flesh and blood, just to maintain the absolute illusion of generational wealth and untouchable status. She was so desperate to protect the family reputation from any perceived flaw that she threw me to the wolves of public opinion without a single second thought. They all needed to intensely believe I was a complete failure, because it made their deeply fabricated lives look significantly more impressive by comparison. They desperately needed someone to look down on, so they would never have to face the terrifying truth of their own empty achievements and mounting failures. I set the phone down on the counter and walked slowly over to the custom espresso machine, the rich, dark aroma of roasted beans filling the quiet, peaceful penthouse. I poured a fresh hot cup and carried it back to my secure tablet, pulling up the raw financial data my aggressive legal team had compiled overnight. I sipped the dark espresso, while my eyes scanned the harsh, terrifying reality of Connor's heavily leveraged life. His flashy finance bro persona, his leased luxury cars, and the expensive designer bags he constantly bought for Aaliah were all built on a rapidly crumbling house of cards. His commercial real estate company was bleeding cash daily, and he had been defaulting on his massive corporate loans for several months. He was drowning deeply in debt, and Apex Holdings now legally owned every single drop of it. I traced my finger over the glowing digital balance showing his imminent, unavoidable bankruptcy, just as a new notification slid across the top of my phone screen. A direct message had popped up, and the name attached to it made my coffee freeze halfway to my lips. It was from Trey, the highly opportunistic ex-boyfriend who had dumped me 5 years ago because he claimed I was far too ambitionless for his fast-paced lifestyle. I opened the direct message, feeling a familiar mix of disgust and amusement wash over me as his harsh words filled the glowing screen. Trey had always been a master of terrible timing and completely unearned arrogance. His message was predictably brutal, lacking any sense of basic human decency or self-awareness. He wrote that he saw Aaliah's Instagram post making the rounds in the local social scene and just had to reach out to gloat about my public downfall. He told me he was incredibly glad he had dodged a massive bullet by dumping me 5 years ago, when I was crying over that fast food rejection. He said it was deeply embarrassing to see a woman in her 30s getting thrown out of her parents' mansion like a stray dog, and that he always knew I lacked the fundamental drive to succeed in the competitive Atlanta landscape. He went on to explicitly warn me not to come crawling back to him or ask him for any kind of personal loan now that I was officially homeless and cut off from the family wealth. He bragged extensively about his current trajectory, claiming his life was on an aggressive upward path that I could never comprehend. Trey typed a long, arrogant paragraph boasting that he was on the absolute verge of closing a massive, life-changing deal. He proudly declared that his new tech startup was about to secure $5 million in angel funding from a highly exclusive private equity firm. He ended the message by telling me to find a cheap apartment and a minimum wage job because the elite circles of the city were now permanently closed to me. I sat there in my luxurious penthouse staring at the pure audacity radiating from the digital text. Trey was puffing his chest out trying to humiliate me while bragging about a $5 million lifeline he desperately needed to keep his fragile company afloat. He was kicking me while he thought I was down, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation. I did not bother typing a reply to his pathetic attempt at asserting dominance. I simply took a screenshot of his message, saved it to my secure folder, and tossed the phone onto the plush sofa. An hour later, my driver pulled the Maybach up to the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper that housed the global headquarters of Apex Holdings. I walked through the towering double doors of the lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the polished Italian marble floor. The security personnel and front desk staff immediately stood straighter, offering quiet, respectful greetings as I bypassed the main reception and stepped into my private, dedicated elevator. The high-speed lift shot up to the 40th floor, opening directly into my expansive corner office. The space was a fortress of modern corporate power, featuring panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding, majestic view of the entire financial district. My executive assistant, a highly efficient and ruthlessly organized woman named Claire, was already waiting by my massive mahogany desk. "Good morning, boss," she said, handing me a thick leather-bound portfolio containing the daily briefing and the final schedule for the upcoming investment quarter. I took a sip of the freshly brewed green tea she had prepared and opened the portfolio, scanning the complex financial documents with practiced speed. Claire pointed to a specific tab indicating an urgent matter regarding the angel funding division. She explained that the investment committee had highly recommended a promising new tech startup for our latest $5 million venture capital initiative, but they needed my final executive signature to approve the massive payout and release the funds. I flipped to the financial profile of the desperate company, begging Apex Holdings for a financial lifeline. My eyes scanned the executive summary, the heavily fabricated user acquisition metrics, and the artificially inflated revenue projections before landing squarely on the name of the founder and chief executive officer. It was Trey's startup, the exact same man who had just messaged me an hour ago to brag about his imminent $5 million funding deal and mock. My supposed homelessness was sitting entirely at my mercy. His entire future, his heavily leveraged company, and his bloated ego were completely dependent on the signature of the woman he had just called an ambitionless stray dog. A low, genuine laugh escaped my lips, echoing through the quiet, cavernous space of my corner office. It was the most poetic, absurd twist of fate imaginable. Claire watched me with mild curiosity as I closed the leather portfolio and slid it back across the smooth mahogany desk. I did not reach for my gold fountain pen to sign his funding approval. Instead, I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, steepling my fingers as a brilliant and utterly ruthless plan formed in my mind. I looked up at my assistant, my voice cool and perfectly steady. I told her to approve him, to advance to the absolute final pitch stage, but to bypass the standard committee review process. I explained that I wanted to handle this specific acquisition personally. Claire nodded, jotting down the strict instructions on her tablet. She asked when she should schedule the final meeting for him to present to the board, assuming I wanted to bring him into the corporate headquarters. I smiled, feeling the delicious heavy weight of the power I held over every single person who had ever wronged me. "Tell Mr. Trey his final pitch to the CEO will be this Saturday night," I instructed softly. "At my sister's brand launch gala in Buckhead." The next morning, the reality of day 2 set in, but not for me. Miles away from my tranquil penthouse, Connor was currently drowning in a sea of his own making. He sat in his overly expensive, heavily leased corner office in Midtown, sweating through his custom-tailored designer shirt. His hands were trembling as he gripped the edge of his glass desk, staring blankly at the massive, sprawling skyline he pretended to conquer. The speakerphone sitting between his shaking hands was practically vibrating with the frantic, panicked screams of his senior accountant. The man on the other end of the line was losing his mind, explaining how the floor had completely fallen out from underneath their entire commercial real estate operation. Connor had spent the last 3 years playing the role of the highly successful finance bro, infiltrating Atlanta's black elite by projecting an image of untouchable wealth. But his entire portfolio was built on toxic commercial loans and massive leverage. Now the bill had come due. The accountant was shouting that a highly aggressive shadow firm named Apex Holdings had swooped in overnight and bought up every single one of Connor's defaulted loans from the regional banks. They were not restructuring the debt, and they were not offering any grace periods. The legal notice sitting in Connor's inbox was a brutal, terrifying demand for the immediate repayment of $4 million in liquid cash. If he failed to transfer the funds within the week, Apex Holdings would seize his entire company, his leased luxury vehicles, and every single personal asset he had tied to the business. Connor felt the air leaving his lungs. His perfectly crafted world of country club memberships and exclusive golf outings was violently imploding. He loosened his silk tie, gasping for breath as the accountant begged him to figure out a solution before they were all facing federal bankruptcy court and potential fraud investigations. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive product as pure panic set in. For years, he had mocked me at family dinners, acting like a financial genius while secretly moving debt from one shell company to another. He had looked down on my father Harrison while simultaneously bleeding the family dry to maintain his own pathetic illusions of grandeur. Now the invisible hand of Apex Holdings was tightening around his throat, squeezing the life out of his fake empire. The $4 million demand was not a negotiation, it was an execution order. Connor slammed his fist down on the glass desk, terminating the call in a fit of absolute helpless rage, knowing he was trapped. Right at the peak of his terrifying spiral, the heavy oak door of his office swung open, and Aaliyah strolled in, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse happening around her. She was wearing a brand-new $5,000 quilted Chanel bag, draped casually over her shoulder, her hair freshly blown out and her makeup absolutely flawless. She dropped a shopping bag onto the leather sofa and sighed dramatically, running a hand down her expensive silk dress. She immediately began to complain about me rehashing the events of the driveway, as if throwing her own sister out into the rain was a massive inconvenience to her daily schedule. "Can you believe the nerve of Sienna?" Ayalaya whined, pacing the floor of his office. "My mom is still upset because Aunt Brenda keeps bringing up the fast food story in the group chat and asking if Sienna is sleeping on a park bench yet. It is so embarrassing for our family brand. I had to go buy this Chanel bag just to calm my nerves." Connor stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of disgust and absolute terror. Aaliyah kept talking, oblivious to the red creeping up his neck. She said they needed to host a lavish champagne brunch this weekend, before her brand launch gala, just to show everyone they were unbothered by the unemployed leech ruining their vibe. Connor finally snapped, his voice cracked like a whip echoing sharply through the glass office. "Shut up, Aaliyah!" he roared, slamming his hands down on the desk so hard the monitor shook. "Just shut your mouth for 1 single second." Aaliyah froze, her jaw dropping in shock. Connor never yelled at her like that. They always played the perfect power couple for Instagram, but the massive cracks in their deeply toxic marriage were suddenly splitting wide open. "We are broke, Aaliyah!" he screamed, his face turning purple as he pointed a shaking finger at her new designer bag. "We do not have $5,000 for a purse. We do not have money for a champagne brunch. My company is completely underwater, and a private equity firm just called in a $4 million debt that I cannot pay. If I do not find the money by this weekend, they are going to liquidate everything we own, including the car you drove here in." Aaliyah stared at him horrified as the reality of her fake luxurious lifestyle began to violently shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Connor ignored her sudden, pathetic tears and practically shoved her out of his office, locking the heavy door behind her. He scrambled back to his desk, his hands violently trembling as he dialed his most connected corporate broker. The moment the man answered, Connor was practically hyperventilating into the receiver. "Listen to me," he begged, his voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. "You have to find out who the CEO of Apex Holdings is. I do not care what it costs or who you have to bribe, just get me a name. My wife is hosting a massive brand launch gala this Saturday night in Buckhead. If I have to, I will track this CEO down and beg them on my knees in front of the entire city. Just get me a meeting." Connor hung up and paced the floor, chewing on his thumbnail like a cornered rat. 20 agonizing minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was the broker. Connor snatched it up, his heart hammering against his ribs, demanding an answer. The broker sighed heavily into the phone. "The CEO is a total ghost, Connor. Nobody knows their name. But their legal team just confirmed something. They will be attending your wife's gala this Saturday night to finalize a few acquisitions." Connor closed his eyes, a desperate, pathetic smile creeping onto his face, as he thought he actually had a chance to save himself. On the third day, the illusion of black excellence began to rot from the inside out, starting with my mother, Valerie. She was sitting on the sun-drenched patio of the most exclusive country club in Atlanta, surrounded by 5 of her wealthiest church friends. Valerie was wearing a pristine white linen suit, sipping a mimosa and holding court at the center of the table. She was leaning in close to the other women, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper as she completely assassinated my character for the entertainment of her social circle. Valerie told them all about the dramatic scene in the driveway, exaggerating every detail to make herself look like a long-suffering martyr who had finally drawn a boundary with a lazy child. She proudly announced that she had thrown me out into the rain because she simply could not allow my lack of ambition to poison the pure success of her golden daughter Aaliyah and her brilliant son-in-law Connor. The other women nodded sympathetically, sipping their drinks and praising Valerie's tough love approach. They told her she was incredibly brave for maintaining such high standards and protecting the Williams family legacy from my supposed failures. Valerie soaked up their validation like a sponge, her chest puffing out with absolute pride. She bragged extensively about Connor's massive finance empire and Aalia's upcoming brand launch gala, promising the women it would be the social event of the year. When the waiter approached the table with the leather-bound check folder for the $400 lunch bill, Valerie waved her hand dismissively and offered to cover the entire table. It was a classic power move designed to solidify her status as the wealthy, generous matriarch. She pulled her platinum credit card from her designer purse and handed it to the waiter with a practiced, arrogant smile. The waiter bowed his head slightly and walked away toward the register, while Valerie continued to boast about the luxury vehicles Connor had just purchased. A few minutes later, the waiter returned, but his posture was rigid, and his face was tight with polite discomfort. He leaned down close to Valerie's ear, speaking softly, so the other women would not hear. But his words cut through her vanity like a knife. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Williams," the waiter whispered apologetically, "but your card has been declined." Valerie's smile froze instantly on her face. She let out a forced, nervous laugh, claiming it was just a silly bank error or a security freeze due to her extensive charity donations. She quickly dug into her purse and handed him a second card, her hands trembling slightly as the other women pretended not to notice the awkward delay. The waiter returned 2 minutes later, shaking his head with a look of genuine pity. "I apologize again, Mom, but this card was also declined for insufficient funds." Valerie felt the blood drain completely from her face as the suffocating weight of public humiliation crashed down on her shoulders. She managed to scrape together enough cash from the bottom of her purse to cover her portion of the bill, forcing her confused friends to split the rest of the tab. She practically ran out of the country club, her face burning with deep shame as she retreated to the privacy of her car. Her hands shook violently as she locked the doors and immediately dialed my father, Harrison. The moment he answered, she erupted into a frantic, panicked whisper, demanding to know why both of her primary accounts were completely frozen. Harrison sounded exhausted, his voice heavy with a dark, terrifying reality they had been hiding from the entire community for years. Valerie was screaming into the phone about the profound embarrassment she had just suffered in front of the church elders. But Harrison cut her off with a harsh, desperate tone. "The bank froze everything, Valerie," he admitted, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "They are calling in the debts because we missed the last 3 payments on the house." Valerie gasped, clutching the leather steering wheel as the massive lie they had been living finally caught up to them. 3 years ago, when Connor's very first commercial real estate venture had quietly imploded and faced total bankruptcy, Harrison and Valerie had made a disastrous choice. They were so obsessed with maintaining the flawless image of their successful white son-in-law and their golden daughter that they secretly took out a massive second mortgage on the ancestral Williams estate. They had completely leveraged the generational mansion, taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars to quietly bail Connor out and hide his massive failure from the Atlanta elite. They had risked the very roof over their heads just to keep up the artificial appearance of untouchable wealth, always assuming Connor would eventually strike it rich and pay them back. But Connor never paid them back. Instead, he kept sinking deeper into debt, borrowing more money to lease luxury cars and buy Aaliyah expensive gifts to keep up the charade. Harrison and Valerie had been quietly drowning for months, draining their retirement accounts just to make the minimum monthly payments on the massive secret mortgage. They had kicked me out into the rain for being broke while they were literally suffocating under a mountain of hidden debt caused by the very man they constantly praised. Harrison was standing in the grand foyer of the sprawling mansion, staring blankly at a thick manila envelope that the postman had just delivered, requiring his direct signature. The logo printed on the top corner of the heavy paper belonged to a private equity firm he had never heard of before today. Apex Holdings. He told Valerie to stop crying and listen to him as he tore open the seal with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned the harsh legal jargon printed on the crisp white paper, and his heart stopped completely in his chest. It was not a warning from their usual bank. The local bank had sold their deeply defaulted mortgage to an aggressive shadow firm. Harrison read the document and felt his knees go weak as he relayed the terrifying news to his hysterical wife. "Valerie, we do not have time to worry about country club lunches," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a hollow, terrified whisper that echoed through the empty mansion. "Apex Holdings just sent us a formal notice of default. If we do not pay $150,000 by this coming Monday, they are foreclosing on the house." On the 4th day, the anticipation for the brand launch gala had reached a fever pitch within the local social scene. Aunt Brenda, who had always acted as the unofficial public relations manager for the Williams family, decided to take the public humiliation campaign to a completely new level. She was sitting in her lavishly decorated living room, scrolling aggressively through her social media feeds, looking for another opportunity to elevate Aaliyah while stomping on my non-existent reputation. Brenda crafted a highly produced countdown post for the gala, complete with sparkling graphics, and tagged nearly every prominent member of Atlanta's Black elite. She made sure to prominently tag my inactive account right in the center of the post so that anyone viewing the digital invitation would immediately think of the disgraced, unemployed sister who was supposedly sleeping on a park bench. The caption she typed out was dripping with her signature brand of toxic, self-righteous arrogance. She wrote a lengthy paragraph praising Aaliyah and Connor for their massive financial success, claiming they were the absolute pinnacle of young wealth and generational prosperity. Then she dropped the final insult, a direct targeted warning aimed squarely at me. Brenda typed out the words, "Reminder, in this family, we celebrate winners and true visionaries. Losers can watch the glamorous festivities from the wet sidewalk where they belong." She hit post and immediately sent a screenshot of her cruel masterpiece directly into the private family group chat, demanding praise from Valerie and Harrison for defending the family honor. The notification popped up on my secure phone screen, A pathetic, desperate attempt to draw a reaction from the woman they all believed was utterly broken and defeated. Brenda had spent her entire adult life riding the coattails of my parents' supposed wealth, and now she was ruthlessly mocking the very person who secretly held the deed to the roof over her own head. She had no idea the massive storm that was gathering just beyond her pristine horizon. I did not engage with the notification. I simply swiped it away with a calm, dismissive flick of my finger, entirely unbothered by the pathetic buzzing of a dying insect. I was standing perfectly still in the center of a heavily mirrored private fitting room, located in the most exclusive boutique in the city. The soft ambient lighting highlighted the rich, flawless texture of the garment I was currently wearing. I was not shopping for discount clothes or begging for handouts. I was being meticulously fitted for a custom-tailored blood-red Tom Ford power suit. The master tailor, an older gentleman with decades of experience dressing the global elite, was kneeling on the plush carpet, carefully pinning the hem of the vibrant crimson trousers. The color of the suit was intentional, a bold, aggressive, and utterly commanding shade of deep red that demanded absolute submission from anyone in the room. It was the color of a predator ready to strike. The structured shoulders of the blazer cut a sharp, intimidating silhouette, contrasting perfectly with the crisp white silk blouse underneath. The tailor worked in reverent silence, adjusting the highly structured fabric to fit my frame with absolute terrifying perfection. As he smoothed the lapel of the expensive blazer, I looked at my reflection in the trifold mirrors. The woman staring back at me was a relentless force of nature, a highly calculated corporate titan who had built an empire from the ashes of her family's constant rejection. I adjusted the gold cufflinks on my sleeves, feeling the heavy, solid weight of my own self-made success. Aaliyah and Connor were likely sweating over their maxed-out credit cards trying to rent designer outfits to maintain their fragile facade, while I was dropping thousands of dollars on a bespoke suit simply to wear as my armor for their financial execution. The tailor stepped back, nodding in profound satisfaction as the blood-red fabric draped flawlessly across my body. He murmured a quiet compliment about how the aggressive color suited my fierce energy perfectly. I thanked him, handing his assistant an exclusive black card to cover the exorbitant cost without even glancing at the final receipt. The suit was not just clothing, it was a physical manifestation of the absolute ruin I was about to bring down upon the people who had mocked my existence. Just as the tailor finished packing the pristine garment into a heavy protective garment bag, the heavy velvet curtains of the private fitting room parted. My lead corporate attorney walked in, flanked by a silent security detail carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He approached me with a somber, deeply respectful expression, recognizing the absolute gravity of the moment. He opened the briefcase and placed two crisp legal documents onto the glass table, resting in the center of the room. One was the formal asset seizure warrant for Connor's completely bankrupt commercial real estate company. The other was the final eviction notice for my parents' heavily leveraged ancestral estate. I reached into the inner pocket of my bag and retrieved a heavy gold fountain pen. The cool metal felt perfect against my skin as I smoothly uncapped it. I leaned over the glass table and signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes, legally finalizing the absolute destruction of their fake empire. The attorney gathered the signed paperwork, carefully sliding the devastating documents back into his leather briefcase. He looked up at me, adjusting his glasses with a strictly professional demeanor. He asked quietly if he should have the local bailiffs deliver the eviction notice and the asset seizure warrant to them today, ready to execute the legal orders immediately. I looked at my reflection one last time, adjusting the collar of my shirt, as a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. No, I told him, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous whisper that echoed slightly in the mirrored room. Hand deliver them to me. I will be the postman tomorrow night. I want to look directly into their eyes when they realize the unemployed sister they threw into the rain is the exact same person holding the absolute keys to their total ruin. The lawyer nodded slowly, a look of deep understanding crossing his face as he handed the sealed envelopes directly into my waiting hands. The next morning, Trey stepped out of a leased luxury sedan, A desperate attempt to look the part of a successful entrepreneur even though the payments were draining his last remaining bank account. He tilted his head back to stare up at the towering glass facade of the Apex Holdings skyscraper. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored suit, a piece of clothing he had maxed out 2 different credit cards to purchase just for this specific meeting. His heart was pounding with the kind of frantic, greedy anticipation that only comes from a desperate man who believes he is about to become incredibly wealthy. He walked through the sliding glass doors of the grand lobby carrying a sleek leather briefcase that contained the heavily fabricated financial projections for his failing tech startup. Trey muttered his pitch under his breath as he crossed the polished marble floor, flashing an arrogant smile at the security guards who silently directed him to the private executive elevator. He rode the high-speed lift to the 40th floor, watching the city of Atlanta shrink beneath him, feeling an absolute rush of unearned superiority. He was finally going to sit across from the mysterious billionaire CEO of Apex Holdings and secure the $5 million angel investment that would catapult him into the elite circles of the city. When the elevator doors glided open, Trey stepped out into the pristine modern reception area, expecting a red carpet. Welcome. Instead, he was met by the cold, calculating gaze of Sienna's executive assistant Claire. She sat behind a massive curved desk, radiating the kind of intense corporate authority that immediately made Trey's arrogant smile falter. He approached her desk, clearing his throat to announce his arrival, but Claire did not even look up from her monitor. She simply raised one perfectly manicured finger, forcing him to stand there in awkward silence for 2 full, agonizing minutes. Trey shifted his weight nervously, his sweaty palms leaving damp marks on the handle of his expensive briefcase. He was used to charming his way through business meetings, but the icy atmosphere of the Apex executive floor was entirely immune to his fake charisma. She let him sweat for another moment, letting the heavy silence of the room press down on his fragile ego before she finally decided to address him. Claire slowly turned her attention to him, her expression completely devoid of any warmth or welcome. Claire folded her hands on the desk and looked Trey up and down, taking in his expensive suit and his desperate, eager posture. She knew exactly who he was, and exactly how much pleasure her boss was going to take in destroying him. Mr. Trey. She began, her voice smooth and strictly professional. I am the executive assistant to the chief executive officer, and you are here for the final review of your $5 million funding request. Trey nodded enthusiastically, stepping forward and placing his briefcase on her desk, ready to launch into the pitch he had spent all night memorizing. He opened his mouth to speak, but Claire held up her hand again, stopping him dead in his tracks. The CEO has already reviewed your numbers, Mr. Trey, she said flatly. Every single metric, every user acquisition projection, and every revenue forecast you submitted has been thoroughly analyzed by our internal acquisitions team. Trey swallowed hard, a sudden flash of panic hitting him as he thought about the blatantly manipulated data hiding inside his portfolio. He tried to force a confident laugh, assuring her that his startup was on the verge of revolutionizing the tech industry. Claire did not smile. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his with terrifying intensity. The CEO is a highly private individual who demands absolute honesty above all else, Mr. Trey. And they have taken a very specific personal interest in your company and your trajectory. Because of the unique nature of this particular investment, the CEO has decided to bypass the standard boardroom presentation. Trey's panic instantly dissolved back into blinding arrogance. He assumed his fabricated numbers were so impressive that he was receiving special treatment from a billionaire. Claire pulled a heavy cardstock envelope from her drawer and slid it across the desk toward him. The CEO will give you the final verdict and sign the funding agreement tomorrow night, she instructed smoothly. They have arranged to meet you at the Buckhead Brand Launch Gala, hosted by Aaliyah Williams, where you will deliver your final pitch directly to the CEO. Trey snatched the envelope, his hands shaking with pure, unfiltered greed, completely oblivious to the massive trap that had just snapped shut around his ankles. Trey practically sprinted out of the Apex Holdings building, his ego inflated to astronomical proportions. He pulled out his phone the moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, his fingers flying across the screen as he drafted an urgent text message directly to Aaliyah. "Make sure I get absolute VIP access tomorrow night," he typed aggressively, "because I am closing a $5 million deal with a billionaire CEO right in the middle of your party, so have a private table ready." Aaliyah, sitting in her heavily mortgaged mansion, received the message and squealed with delight. She immediately replied, promising him the best seat in the house, thrilled that her gala was going to be the backdrop for such a massive display of Black excellence and wealth. The entire fake empire was perfectly positioned for the party, totally unaware of the silent predator circling them. Miles away in her penthouse, Sienna sat on her velvet sofa staring at her encrypted phone. She opened the blocked family group chat, the one Aunt Brenda had created to mock her eviction. Using a backdoor administrative bypass her tech team had installed, Sienna watched her family trading shallow jokes and bragging about the upcoming gala. The message sat there on the screen like a ticking time bomb, waiting to detonate their entire world. She knew the panic it would cause. With a slow, deliberate smile, Sienna tapped the screen and dropped a single text message into the chat. "I have a massive gift for everyone tomorrow night." On the fifth day, the morning of the highly anticipated brand launch gala arrived, painting the Atlanta sky in bright, deceptive sunlight. Inside the heavily mortgaged walls of the Williams ancestral estate, the atmosphere was a chaotic mix of blinding arrogance and frantic vanity. Aaliyah and Valerie were sitting in the expansive master suite, wrapped in matching silk robes, while a team of expensive hair and makeup artists hovered over them. Aaliyah was holding her phone up to the bright vanity mirror, staring at the single text message I had dropped into the family group chat the night before. She let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed sharply off the high ceilings. "She is probably bringing discount coupons to beg for a room at the hotel," Aaliyah sneered, tossing the phone onto the marble vanity. "She is so desperate for attention now that she realizes nobody in the city wants anything to do with a broke 31-year-old failure." Valerie nodded vigorously, adjusting her posture as a stylist sprayed a cloud of expensive hairspray around her head. Valerie was clinging to her absolute delusion, deliberately ignoring the terrifying notice of default that was currently locked inside her husband's desk drawer. She completely dismissed my text as a pathetic empty threat from a jealous older sister. "Do not let her ruin your energy today, Aaliyah." Valerie soothed, her tone dripping with toxic motherly pride. "You are the absolute star of the family. Your brand launch tonight is going to cement our status in the community forever, and if Sienna actually dares to show her face at the venue, I will personally have the security guards throw her back into the street where she belongs." They clinked their crystal glasses of morning mimosas together, totally intoxicated by their own fabricated superiority. They spent the next hour gossiping about which high-profile guests would be attending the gala, completely oblivious to the financial slaughterhouse waiting for them. Down the hall in the sprawling guest suite, the illusion of perfection was rapidly disintegrating. Connor was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, sweating profusely as he aggressively chugged amber whiskey straight from a heavy crystal decanter. His hands were shaking so violently that he spilled the expensive liquor down his chin. He slammed the glass down and frantically wiped his face, staring at his pale, terrified reflection. He was desperately trying to adjust his silk bow tie, but his fingers felt numb and useless. The crushing weight of the $4 million debt Apex Holdings had called in was suffocating him. Connor leaned his forehead against the cold bathroom mirror, muttering his begging speech under his breath. He was obsessively practicing exactly how he was going to drop to his knees and grovel to the mysterious billionaire CEO of Apex Holdings at the gala tonight. He was rehearsing his pathetic pleas for an extension, trying to figure out how to completely surrender his dignity without Aaliyah finding out he was a massive fraud. Meanwhile, in the dark wood-paneled study downstairs, Harrison was experiencing his own private hell. He was standing behind his mahogany desk, aggressively popping antacid tablets into his mouth, chewing them into a chalky paste. His stomach was burning with an agonizing fire. The massive payment of $150,000 was due on Monday to stop the foreclosure of the mansion, and he had absolutely zero liquid cash to his name. He stared at the terrifying legal document from Apex Holdings, feeling the entire legacy of the Williams family crumbling into dust. But Harrison was a master of dangerous deception. He swallowed the chalky pills, took a deep, stabilizing breath, and forced his face into a rigid mask of pure, untouchable authority. He slipped into his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket, checking the reflection of his gold watch. He squared his shoulders and walked out of the study, projecting the absolute image of a wealthy, commanding patriarch. The stark, terrifying contrast between the women's arrogant ignorance upstairs and the men's suffocating silent terror downstairs was the perfect recipe for a catastrophic implosion. Harrison walked into the grand foyer and called out to his family, demanding they hurry up. Connor stumbled out of the guest room, reeking of expensive cologne and cheap whiskey, pasting a fake, confident smile on his face as he offered his arm to his oblivious wife. Miles away from their frantic, crumbling estate, I stepped out of the master bedroom of my luxury penthouse. The blood-red, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit fit my body like a flawless suit of armor. The sharp, structured lines of the crimson blazer radiated pure, absolute power, completely contrasting the crisp, white silk blouse underneath. I stood in front of the full-length mirror for a brief moment, feeling a profound, chilling calm wash over my entire being. There was no anxiety, no fear, and no lingering familial guilt. I walked over to the glass dining table and picked up the sleek black leather briefcase my attorneys had left for me. I opened the smooth silver clasps and carefully slid the two thick, terrifying legal envelopes inside. The asset seizure warrant for Connor's fake finance empire, and the final eviction notice for my parents' heavily leveraged ancestral mansion rested perfectly next to each other. I snapped the briefcase shut, the solid click echoing sharply in the quiet penthouse. I rode the private elevator down to the lobby, where the black Mercedes Maybach was already idling quietly by the curb. My driver opened the rear door, bowing his head respectfully as I slid into the luxurious cream leather interior. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, cutting off the sounds of the bustling city outside. I settled into the seat and placed the briefcase, resting it securely on my lap. My driver looked back at me through the rearview mirror, waiting for my command to head to the Buckhead Gala. I looked out the tinted window, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "Take the long way," I told him, my voice smooth and merciless. "Let them enjoy their final hour of royalty." The grand ballroom of the five-star Buckhead Hotel was a breathtaking display of excessive wealth and desperate social climbing. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden light over the sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Atlanta's political heavyweights and the absolute elite of the Black business community were all gathered in one room, clutching flutes of vintage champagne and exchanging superficial pleasantries. The extravagant floral arrangements draped across the tables added to the heavy, suffocating scent of the room. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the relentless hum of aggressive networking. Right in the center of the glittering chaos, Aaliyah was holding court like a reigning queen. She was draped in a silver sequined gown that cost more than most people's annual rent, striking highly rehearsed poses for a swarm of local society photographers. Her smile was blindingly bright, completely artificial, and expertly crafted for maximum social media engagement. Valerie stood just outside, the flash of the cameras beaming with toxic pride as she watched her golden child command the attention of the room. Valerie was actively parading her fake success to the wives of prominent city councilmen, pretending the terrifying notice of default, burning a hole in Harrison's desk drawer, simply did not exist. Meanwhile, stationed strategically near the towering champagne pyramid, Aunt Brenda was fulfilling her role as the family megaphone. She was wearing an obnoxious feathered dress and speaking at a volume designed to ensure everyone within a 10-foot radius could hear her toxic gossip. Brenda was leaning in close to a group of wealthy church ladies aggressively whispering the highly exaggerated story of my departure from the family estate. She bragged about how Valerie and Harrison had finally kicked the lazy 31-year-old dead weight to the curb, proudly declaring that the Williams family brand was now completely purged of any embarrassing failures. She laughed a loud, cackling sound, claiming that I was probably sitting in a cheap diner somewhere, crying over my ruined life, while my younger sister cemented her status as Atlanta royalty. The women around Brenda clucked their tongues in fake sympathy, secretly thrilled by the messy family drama, completely unaware that the very foundation of the Williams empire was built on a crumbling mountain of unpaid debt. Just as Brenda's gossip reached its peak, Trey swaggered through the grand entrance of the ballroom, acting as though his name was already etched onto the side of a skyscraper. He was wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket that he had definitely put on a high-interest credit card, projecting the supreme unearned confidence of a man who believed he was mere hours away from becoming a multimillionaire. Trey grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and immediately began working the room aggressively, handing out his sleek black business cards to anyone who made eye contact. He was loudly boasting to a group of local investors that his tech startup was currently in the final stages of closing a massive $5 million angel funding deal with an ultra-exclusive private equity firm. He puffed his chest out, claiming the mysterious billionaire CEO of Apex Holdings had taken a personal interest in his visionary brilliance and was attending the gala specifically to hand him a life-changing check. Trey caught sight of Aaliyah across the room and raised his glass to her, flashing a conspiratorial grin completely blinded by his own astronomical hubris. But while Trey was riding high on a total fabrication, Connor was physically suffocating under the crushing weight of impending ruin. The white finance bro was standing near the grand entrance, his face pale and slick with a cold, terrified sweat. He kept tugging violently at his silk bow tie, feeling like it was literally choking the life out of him. Connor ignored the political elites and the wealthy socialites pacing frantically back and forth near the main reception desk. He practically lunged at the lead concierge, slamming his hands down on the polished mahogany counter. His voice was a desperate, shaking whisper as he begged the confused hotel employee to check the VIP guest list for the 10th time. He pleaded with the staff to tell him if the representatives from Apex Holdings had arrived yet, his eyes darting wildly around the crowded ballroom. He desperately needed to intercept them before his massive fraud was exposed to his wife and her judgmental parents. He told them his entire life depended on finding the CEO the second they walked through those doors. The concierge frowned, pulling back slightly from Connor's frantic, manic energy, and calmly stated that no one under the name of Apex had checked in with reception yet. Connor wiped the dripping sweat from his forehead, his breathing growing ragged and shallow as the terrible reality of his $4 million defaulted loan screamed in his mind. The live jazz band playing softly in the corner of the ballroom had just transitioned into a smooth, upbeat tempo, and Aaliyah was preparing to step up to the microphone for her grand welcoming speech. Harrison and Valerie were gathering near the front of the stage, positioning themselves perfectly for the cameras ready to bask in the blinding glow of their fabricated generational wealth. Suddenly, the heavy oak double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom swung open with a massive resonating thud that echoed sharply across the cavernous room. The sudden, forceful movement caught the attention of the event coordinator, who immediately signaled the jazz band. The music abruptly ground to a halting, discordant stop. A heavy, chilling silence rapidly washed over the sea of wealthy guests as hundreds of heads turned simultaneously toward the entrance. Everyone held their breath, unable to process the sudden disruption to the carefully orchestrated evening of flawless black excellence. I stepped slowly over the threshold, the blood-red Tom Ford suit radiating an aura of pure, absolute devastation. I was flanked on either side by two towering corporate lawyers in immaculate dark suits carrying sleek leather briefcases and followed closely by a silent, intimidating personal security detail. The entire room went dead silent. The heavy silence that blanketed the grand ballroom was suffocating. Every eye in the room was locked onto my blood-red suit and the towering corporate lawyers flanking my sides. The sheer magnitude of the disruption had paralyzed the Atlanta elite. Aalia's face contorted from stunned disbelief into blinding rage. She stomped across the polished marble floor, her heavy silver-sequined gown dragging behind her like a storm cloud. Her heels clicked aggressively as she closed the distance between us, her eyes wide with toxic fury. "Who let you in here?" Aaliyah hissed, her voice trembling with venom and embarrassment. She stopped a few feet away from my security detail, pointing a shaking manicured finger at my face. "This is a highly exclusive VIP event, not a charity kitchen. You have some serious nerve showing up here in a rented suit trying to ruin the most important night of my life. You are a pathetic, unemployed leech, and you are not going to embarrass me." Aaliyah turned wildly toward the perimeter of the room, frantically waving her arms. "Security," she yelled, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Get over here right now and throw this trash out into the street." From the sidelines, Aunt Brenda pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her feathered dress rustling loudly. Brenda let out a sharp, malicious cackle that cut through the tense atmosphere. She clapped her hands, looking around at the wealthy socialites trying to control the narrative. "Oh my goodness, look at this desperate display!" Brenda mocked loudly, ensuring every politician and business owner in the room could hear her gossip. Valerie and Harrison finally kicked her to the curb, so now she is crashing high society parties to get a free meal. "Somebody check her pockets before she leaves." Brenda laughed aggressively, nudging a nearby guest's shoulder. "She is just a bitter 31-year-old failure trying to steal the spotlight." Aaliyah crossed her arms over her chest, glaring at me with supreme, unearned arrogance. "You heard her." "Sienna?" Aaliyah sneered. "You do not belong in this building, let alone this ballroom. You are nothing but a joke to this entire family, so turn around and walk your broke self out that door before I have you physically dragged out in front of the entire city." Two massive hotel security guards immediately detached themselves from the walls of the ballroom, stepping forward to answer Aaliyah's frantic demands. They approached with heavy, intimidating strides, their hands resting on their utility belts, ready to forcefully remove the uninvited guest who was disrupting the glamorous evening. My personal security detail immediately shifted their stance, stepping smoothly in front of me and my corporate lawyers, forming an impenetrable human wall of tailored dark suits. The tension in the room spiked to a dangerous level as the hotel guards realized they were facing off against highly trained executive protection agents. Aaliyah smirked, deeply satisfied with the escalating hostility, believing she was about to watch me get violently thrown out of the luxury venue. But before the hotel guards could issue a verbal warning, a sudden frantic commotion erupted near the rear service doors of the grand ballroom. The general manager of the five-star hotel, a distinguished older man in an immaculate tuxedo, was practically sprinting across the vast expanse of the marble floor. His face was pale and slick with a terrified cold sweat, his perfectly polished shoes sliding slightly as he desperately rushed toward the main entrance. He waved his arms frantically at his own security personnel, shouting at them to stand down immediately. The general manager shoved his way violently through the crowd of wealthy socialites, entirely abandoning his usual refined composure. He grabbed the two massive security guards by their shoulders, physically pushing them aside and ordering them to back away. Aaliyah saw the general manager approaching, and her arrogant smile widened. She assumed he was rushing over to personally apologize to her for the security breach and to handle my humiliating eviction himself. "Finally, some actual customer service," Aaliyah complained loudly, stepping directly into the manager's path, blocking his way to me. "You need to fire whoever was working the front doors tonight because this woman is a total fraud. She is trespassing on my private event, and I want her escorted off the property immediately. She is harassing my family." The general manager did not even look at Aaliyah. He completely ignored her existence, as if she were nothing more than a minor, annoying obstacle. He brushed right past her silver-sequined gown, leaving her standing there with her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. He stopped directly in front of my security detail, taking a deep, ragged breath to steady his racing heart. The general manager straightened his posture and stepped forward with extreme deference that shattered the reality of everyone watching. He planted his feet together and bowed a deep, respectful 90 degrees, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. "Good evening, Mrs. Williams," the manager said, his voice projecting clearly across the dead-silent ballroom, carrying a tone of absolute submission. "Please accept my profound apologies for the unacceptable behavior of my staff. The private executive boardroom has been fully prepared for your acquisitions meeting tonight. Madam Chairman, the entire hotel is at your disposal." The words hung in the air like an earthquake. Ayalaya's jaw dropped, her eyes bulging, as she stared at the manager bowing to the sister she had just called a homeless leech. The collective gasp from the elite crowd sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Standing near the entrance, Connor felt the blood violently drain from his head. His hands shook uncontrollably as his eyes locked onto the sleek black leather briefcase held by the towering corporate lawyer standing at my right side. The crystal glass of whiskey slipped from Connor's numb fingers, crashing down onto the marble floor and shattering into pieces. Embossed perfectly in pure gold lettering across the front of the briefcase was the unmistakable razor-sharp logo of Apex Holdings. The sharp sound of Connor's shattered whiskey glass echoing across the silent marble floor did absolutely nothing to penetrate the thick wall of pure ignorance surrounding my ex-boyfriend. While the rest of the wealthy political elite and the terrified family members were completely paralyzed by the sight of the Apex Holdings logo gleaming on my lawyer's briefcase, Trey remained utterly oblivious to the massive power shift that had just occurred in the room. He had been standing near the back of the grand ballroom, aggressively networking and drinking expensive champagne, completely convinced that tonight was the night he would finally become a multimillionaire. Trey heard the sudden silence spreading through the venue and assumed it was just some dramatic family argument flaring up, exactly the kind of pathetic scene he expected from Ayalea and her supposedly broke older sister. He adjusted his velvet tuxedo jacket, puffed out his chest, and began to confidently push his way through the frozen crowd of Atlanta socialites. He elbowed past prominent city councilmen and wealthy business owners, entirely focused on the towering corporate lawyers standing near the grand entrance. Trey saw the expensive tailored suits, the imposing security detail, and the general manager bowing, and immediately concluded that the mysterious billionaire investors he had been desperately waiting for had finally arrived at the gala. He marched right past Valerie, who was still clutching her chest in horror, and shoved his way past Ayalea, who was staring at the hotel manager in absolute silent shock. Trey did not even bother to look at my face or register the blood-red power suit I was wearing. His greedy eyes were locked entirely on the lead corporate attorney carrying the sleek black briefcase. Trey stepped directly into the center of the tense standoff, flashing a blinding, arrogant smile that reeked of unearned confidence and desperate ambition. He smoothed his silk tie and projected his voice loudly across the silent ballroom, making sure everyone in the vicinity could hear him closing his massive deal. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Trey announced, his tone dripping with false corporate bravado, as he addressed my legal team, while completely ignoring my existence standing right next to them. "My name is Trey, and I was told by the executive assistant at the corporate headquarters this morning that I was scheduled for a final pitch meeting tonight. I am here to see the CEO of Apex Holdings to finalize my $5 million acquisition." The sheer audacity of his completely blind arrogance hung heavily in the suffocating quiet of the ballroom. My security detail did not flinch, and my corporate lawyers simply stared at him with expressions of cold, calculated pity. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the profound satisfaction of the moment wash over my entire body before I finally moved. I turned slowly to face the man who had mercilessly mocked my supposed homelessness just 24 hours ago in a direct message. I looked him up and down, taking in his least velvet jacket and his desperate, eager smile. "You are looking at her, Trey," I said, my voice smooth and completely devoid of any emotion, cutting through the tense air like a scalpel. Trey froze for a fraction of a second, his eyes finally locking onto mine. Then he let out a loud, obnoxious burst of laughter that echoed awkwardly against the crystal chandeliers. He threw his head back genuinely, believing that I had just made a pathetic, desperate joke to save face in front of my wealthy sister and the hotel staff. "Oh man, that is rich." Trey chuckled aggressively, shaking his head and looking around at the silent crowd, expecting them to join in on his cruel amusement. "Sienna, you really need to stop embarrassing yourself in public like this. I know you are upset about getting kicked out into the rain with nothing but a suitcase, but pretending to be a billionaire investor to impress Aaliyah's guests is just a whole new level of sad. Now please step aside so I can conduct actual business with the adults in the room." He reached his hand out toward my lead attorney, still wearing that smug, condescending smirk, completely refusing to accept the reality standing right in front of him. The attorney did not shake his hand. Instead, he looked at me, awaiting my silent command. I gave a single brief nod. The lawyer placed his thumb on the silver clasps of the Apex Holdings briefcase, popping them open with a sharp, metallic click. He reached inside and withdrew a thick, glossy folder bearing the exact logo of Trey's struggling tech startup. The lawyer held the document out with extreme formal deference, handing it directly to me. Trey's obnoxious laughter abruptly died in his throat. His arrogant smile instantly vanished completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror as he recognized his own highly confidential proprietary pitch deck resting firmly in the hands of the woman he had just publicly humiliated. I held the heavy folder for a brief moment, feeling the absolute weight of his entire fabricated future resting in my palms. Then I opened my hand and let the pitch deck drop. The thick folder hit the polished marble floor with a heavy slap, spilling his meticulously falsified financial projections across the ground, right at his shiny, expensive shoes. "Your user data is entirely fabricated, Trey," I announced, my voice projecting clearly across the captivated audience of elite guests. "Your company is bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate, and your revenue forecasts are nothing but desperate lies to cover up your massive operational failures. I, the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, officially deny your $5 million funding request." I stepped closer, leaning in so my words would strike him with maximum devastating impact. "And because you submitted falsified financial documents to a private equity firm, good luck with the severe SEC audit I just triggered this afternoon." The blood drained completely from Trey's face. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed heavily to his knees, landing right on top of his scattered, ruined pitch deck. A collective shocked murmur ripped through the elite crowd of onlookers as the reality of my absolute power finally set in. Standing near the shattered remains of his whiskey glass, Connor watched Trey fall to the floor, and a cold, paralyzing horror gripped his chest as he realized he was next. The sound of Trey's knees hitting the marble floor was the exact trigger that finally shattered the last remaining pieces of Connor's fragile sanity. The arrogant white finance bro who had spent the last 5 years parading around our ancestral estate like a modern-day savior, acting as though his mere presence elevated our black family brand, suddenly lost every single ounce of his fabricated swagger. The deep tan he had paid for at the country club seemed to completely wash away, leaving his face a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. The shattered pieces of his whiskey glass lay forgotten around his expensive shoes as his legs gave out and he stumbled forward. His desperate movements completely lacking any of his usual polished grace. He shoved his way blindly past the prominent city councilmen and wealthy business owners, knocking into the heavy floral arrangements as he practically sprinted across the ballroom floor. Aaliyah tried to grab his arm, reaching out with her heavy sequined sleeve to stop him from making a public scene, but Connor violently yanked his arm away entirely, ignoring his confused wife. He closed the distance between us, panting heavily, his perfectly styled hair now a chaotic mess falling over his terrified eyes. The towering corporate lawyers flanking me tensed immediately, ready to signal the security detail, but I raised one single finger, instructing them to stand down and let the desperate man approach. Connor did not puff his chest out or try to intimidate me. Instead, the man who had mercilessly laughed at me while tossing my luggage into the freezing rain just 24 hours ago physically crumpled right in front of my blood-red suit. Tears were openly streaming down his face, ruining his arrogant facade as he stared at the Apex Holdings logo gleaming on the briefcases. His voice broke, cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed across the dead-silent ballroom. "Sienna, please," he begged, his hands shaking violently as he reached out as if trying to physically grasp onto my expensive blazer. "You are Apex, my company Sienna. It is all I have. Please, you cannot do this. I am your brother-in-law." I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, staring down at the pathetic weeping man who had spent years making me feel like a worthless outsider in my own home. I looked at his expensive tailored suit, the one he had likely purchased using the toxic commercial loans my firm had just bought for pennies on the dollar. The entire room was watching, holding their collective breath, as the wealthy white son-in-law, who had always acted superior to everyone in our community, was now begging a self-made black woman for his financial survival. I did not feel an ounce of pity or familial obligation. I simply felt the cold, hard satisfaction of absolute justice. "You have a very short memory, Connor," I said, my voice smooth and merciless, carrying easily over his pathetic sobs. "Just last night you were standing in the hallway of my parents' mansion laughing while my luggage was thrown into a thunderstorm. You looked me dead in the eye and proudly declared that I should have been charged rent 5 years ago because I was nothing but a useless freeloader draining your resources." I tilted my head slightly, watching the sheer terror widen his bloodshot eyes. "Well, that is incredibly funny, Connor, because I just officially froze all your corporate accounts." The crowd gasped, a collective wave of shock rippling through the wealthy onlookers. Connor let out a choked, desperate sound, clutching his chest as if he were having a physical heart attack. I leaned in closer, ensuring every single politician and business rival in the room could hear the absolute truth about his fake empire. "You have been playing the role of the wealthy, successful investor for years, looking down your nose at my father, and using my sister's social status to secure fraudulent commercial loans. You leased those luxury cars you bought Aaliyah, that $5,000 Chanel bag, and you funded your entire lifestyle using aggressively leveraged debt that you could never repay. And when the regional banks got tired of your constant defaults, they sold your worthless, toxic debt to Apex Holdings." Connor let out a loud, agonizing wail, dropping to his knees right next to the ruined tech founder Trey. He was openly hyperventilating, his face buried in his trembling hands, as the reality of his total financial execution finally destroyed him. I did not wait for him to catch his breath. I held out my hand, and my lead attorney immediately placed the thick, crisp legal envelope directly into my palm. I dropped the formal asset seizure warrant right onto Connor's shaking lap. Aaliyah, who had been standing frozen in absolute horror, finally broke out of her paralysis. She shoved her way past the silent crowd, her silver sequined gown catching the light as she rushed forward. Her face was contorted in blinding panic, looking frantically from her weeping husband on the floor to the terrifying legal documents sitting in his lap. "What did you do?" Aaliyah screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical, echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. "You are ruining my husband. What did you do to him?" I turned slowly to look at my golden sister, my expression entirely devoid of any warmth. "Welcome to your future, Aaliyah," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, chilling whisper. "Dating a bankrupt." Aaliyah's jaw dropped, her hands flying to her mouth as the devastating reality crashed down upon her. But before she could formulate a response, the heavy, aggressive sound of footsteps stomped across the marble floor. Harrison stormed out from the edge of the crowd, pushing past the catering staff with brutal force. His face was a dangerous, terrifying shade of purple, the veins bulging violently in his neck as he glared at me. "How dare you destroy your sister's husband?" he roared, his voice filled with absolute blind rage. "You are a disgrace to this family." Harrison marched forward, his polished Oxford shoes slapping aggressively against the marble floor, his chest puffed out in a desperate final attempt to assert his dominance over the room. He stopped inches from my security detail, completely ignoring the two men sobbing on the floor, his eyes blazing with a toxic mix of fury and deep-seated humiliation. Behind him, Valerie was frantically pushing her way through the stunned crowd of Atlanta elite. Her pristine white linen suit rumpled her face, a mask of absolute frantic panic. She clutched her pearl necklace so tightly, her knuckles were white, her eyes darting wildly between the influential church friends she had just been lying to and the devastating scene unfolding around her golden daughter. The carefully constructed facade of the Williams family legacy was violently imploding in real time, and they were completely powerless to stop it. Harrison pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my face, his voice a harsh, terrifying roar that silenced even the softest murmurs in the ballroom. "How dare you humiliate this family in front of our guests?" he bellowed, his face contorting into a snarl that I had feared for 31 years. "You storm in here looking like some cheap extra in a mob movie and publicly attack your sister's husband. Connor is a brilliant mind, a pillar of the financial community, and you are nothing but a petty, jealous failure trying to drag everyone down to your pathetic level. You owe this family an apology immediately." Valerie reached his side, grabbing his arm not to calm him, but to join the attack, her voice shrill and trembling with desperate vanity. "We gave you everything, Sienna," Valerie screamed, her eyes wide and wet with tears of pure social embarrassment. "We put a roof over your head, we fed you, we tolerated your complete lack of ambition for years while you sat in that bedroom doing absolutely nothing with your life. We supported you when you cried over that fast food job, and this is how you repay us. By showing up to your sister's brand launch gala and trying to ruin the most important night of her career. You are a disgrace to the Williams name and you owe us everything." I stood perfectly still, letting their hateful words wash over me like water off a stone. I did not flinch, I did not cry, and I did not revert back to the terrified 22-year-old girl who used to beg for their approval. I looked at Harrison, taking in his expensive tuxedo and the absolute blinding arrogance radiating from every pore of his body. Then I looked at Valerie, who was still trying to maintain eye contact with the wealthy socialites, silently begging them to believe her fabricated narrative of the long-suffering mother. They were so obsessed with their image of Black excellence that they had completely disconnected from reality. I reached out my hand, and my lead attorney seamlessly produced the final crisp legal envelope from the sleek black briefcase. I held the document up the heavy paper, catching the golden light of the crystal chandeliers, and a profound, terrifying silence instantly fell over the entire ballroom. "You gave me nothing," I stated, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal calmness that cut through the tension like a razor. "You gave me a childhood of constant comparison, toxic criticism, and conditional love based entirely on how well I could perform for your country club friends. You threw me out into the freezing rain 24 hours ago with a crumpled $100 bill because you believed I was a broke, unemployed leech draining your precious resources." I took a slow, deliberate step toward my father, watching the color begin to drain from his face as his eyes locked onto the legal envelope in my hand. "But here is the truly fascinating part, Harrison," I continued, ensuring my voice projected clearly to every single politician and business rival standing in the room. "While you were busy kicking me out for being broke, you were actively hiding the fact that you are completely and utterly bankrupt." The crowd let out a sharp collective gasp, but I did not stop. I pressed the blade in deeper. 3 years ago, when Connor's very first commercial real estate venture quietly imploded and he faced total ruin, you were so terrified of losing face in front of this exact crowd that you committed financial suicide. You secretly took out a massive second mortgage on the ancestral Williams estate, completely leveraging the generational mansion just to bail out your precious white son-in-law. You risked the roof over your own head to protect his fake empire, and you hid it from everyone in this room. Aaliyah let out a choked, horrified sob, her hands flying to her mouth as she stared at her parents in absolute disbelief. Valerie let out a high-pitched, panicked whine, shaking her head frantically as she desperately tried to deny the truth, but the words were already out. You drained your retirement accounts. I pressed on my eyes, locked onto Harrison's terrified face. You bled yourselves dry just to make the minimum monthly payments on that secret mortgage, while Connor kept borrowing more money to buy Aaliyah designer bags and lease luxury cars. You prioritized his fake success over your own survival, and now the bill has finally come due. You have not paid the bank in 6 months, Harrison. The mansion is in severe default, and you are days away from total foreclosure. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked murmurs and frantic whispers. The wealthy church ladies Valerie had been bragging to just moments ago were now staring at her with expressions of sheer, unadulterated horror and judgment. The prominent city councilmen and Atlanta elites were exchanging stunned glances, the entire illusion of the Williams family wealth completely shattered in an instant. Harrison opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His jaw trembled, his hands shaking violently at his sides as the profound reality of his public exposure paralyzed him. Valerie collapsed against his shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably, not because she had lost her home, but because she had permanently lost her untouchable social status. The carefully curated image of Black excellence they had worshipped for decades was lying in a million jagged pieces on the marble floor, right next to Connor's shattered whiskey glass. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or familial obligation. I felt only the cold, hard satisfaction of absolute, undeniable justice. A passing waiter, frozen in shock a few feet away, was holding a silver tray loaded with fresh glasses of champagne. I reached out, taking the crisp legal envelope, and slammed it down onto the polished silver tray with a sharp, resonant smack that echoed violently through the silent room. "I bought your debt, Dad," I announced, my voice ringing out with absolute finality. "I bought the defaulted mortgage from the bank yesterday afternoon. I am your landlord. You have 7 days to vacate my house." The sharp smack of the eviction notice hitting the silver tray echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Valerie could no longer maintain the fragile illusion of her pristine life. Her knees buckled completely, giving way beneath the crippling weight of her absolute public ruin. She collapsed heavily into a velvet chair nearby, her pristine white linen suit wrinkling as she buried her face in her trembling hands. The loud, agonizing sobs that tore from her throat were not tears of sorrow for the daughter she had so cruelly abandoned in the freezing rain. They were tears of pure, unadulterated terror for the immediate loss of her untouchable social status. The wealthy church ladies she had spent decades trying to impress were now staring at her with cold, judging eyes, whispering behind their hands, as the mighty Williams family brand disintegrated right in front of them. Valerie was weeping uncontrollably, mourning the death of her country club memberships, her lavish charity luncheons, and the fake generational wealth she had used to mask her deep insecurities. Standing a few feet away, Aaliyah was violently hyperventilating her chest, heaving as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. The heavy silver-sequined gown that she had proudly paraded around the venue suddenly looked like a cheap costume. Her wide, panicked eyes darted from the crumpled form of her weeping mother to the pathetic sight of her white finance bro husband Connor, who was still sobbing on the marble floor next to the ruined tech founder Trey. Aaliyah's perfectly manicured hands gripped her hair, ruining her expensive blowout, as the devastating reality of her entire existence finally shattered her mind. Every single luxury vacation, every designer handbag, every piece of diamond jewelry Connor had ever bought for her was entirely funded by massive defaulted debt. But the most agonizing realization of all was the horrifying truth about who had been quietly keeping the lights on. Aaliyah looked at my blood-red suit and the Apex Holdings briefcase, and the realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Her entire glamorous lifestyle, her fake black excellence, and the very roof over her parents' heads had been secretly funded by my invisible bailouts. The unemployed sister she had mercilessly mocked on Instagram, the woman she had proudly tossed into the street had been the sole financial pillar preventing their total destruction for 3 entire years. Aaliyah gasped for air, her knees knocking together as she realized that her supreme arrogance had directly caused her own execution. She had kicked her actual landlord out of her own house just to post a cruel joke on the internet, and now she was going to be completely homeless because of it. The golden child was choking on the bitter ash of her own supreme vanity, staring at the terrifying consequences of her lifelong cruelty, while her mother wailed loudly in the background, mourning their total social death. While the immediate family was trapped in the center of the ballroom, completely paralyzed by their very public financial slaughter. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the shocked crowd. I was looking for the one person who had eagerly fanned the flames of my humiliation just 24 hours ago. Standing near the towering champagne pyramid, Aunt Brenda was desperately trying to make herself invisible. The loud, obnoxious woman who had spent her entire evening aggressively gossiping about my supposed downfall was now frantically attempting to escape the blast radius of the Williams family explosion. Brenda was shrinking her posture, clutching her cheap purse against her chest as she tried to quietly shuffle backward into the dense crowd of stunned politicians and business owners. The malicious cackle she had used to mock my arrival was completely gone, replaced by the wide, terrified eyes of a cornered rat desperately trying to flee a sinking ship. She thought she could simply slink out the side doors and distance herself from the toxic fallout, pretending she had never been a part of the cruel campaign against me. I was not going to let her escape into the shadows. I walked with slow, deliberate steps toward the small stage where the jazz band had been playing earlier. The crowd parted for me immediately, stepping back as if I were parting the sea. Their eyes filled with a mixture of absolute fear and profound respect. I climbed the 2 short steps to the platform, my blood-red suit capturing the light of the chandeliers above. I reached out and grabbed the microphone from the polished chrome stand. The feedback whined for a brief second, cutting sharply through Valerie's loud sobbing and ensuring that every single person in the massive ballroom was hanging onto my every movement. I looked directly across the room, locking my gaze entirely on the woman in the obnoxious feathered dress, who was currently halfway to the exit. "Leaving so soon, Brenda?" I spoke into the microphone, my voice projecting smoothly and dangerously, echoing off the vaulted ceilings and bouncing off the marble walls. The sound of her name booming across the silent venue caused her to freeze instantly in her tracks. Brenda stopped dead, right in the middle of the crowd, her shoulders stiffening as hundreds of elite guests immediately turned their heads to stare directly at her. She was completely trapped, caught red-handed, attempting to abandon the very family she had just been relentlessly praising. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, holding the microphone with absolute casual authority. "I thought you said this family celebrates winners, Brenda." I continued, my words dripping with icy, lethal precision. "You spent all morning crafting that beautiful countdown post for this gala, ensuring everyone in Atlanta knew exactly how much you despised the lazy 31-year-old loser. You tagged all your prominent friends to laugh at my packed luggage in the rain. Well, here's the winner. Brenda, standing right in front of you, holding the deed to the estate you constantly brag about visiting." Brenda slowly turned around to face me, her face a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. Her mouth opened and closed, but absolutely no sound came out. She was completely stripped of her toxic arrogance, her public relations persona violently ripped away, leaving nothing but a pathetic, terrified shell. "Do not let the reality of this situation stop your social media updates," I commanded through the microphone, my voice ringing with total dominance. "Pull out your phone right now. I want you to take a picture of Connor weeping on the floor." I want you to take a picture of Harrison standing there bankrupt. And most importantly, do not forget to post this exact moment on your Instagram page. Tell all your wealthy friends that the unemployed leech just bought your entire family. And Brenda, be sure to tag me. The sheer absolute humiliation of the moment crashed down on her, crushing her into total submission. Brenda lowered her head completely. Humiliated, her hands shaking so badly, she dropped her purse onto the floor. The wealthy socialites around her physically stepped away, treating her like a highly contagious disease. She was publicly ruined, her social standing completely decimated by the very woman she had tried to destroy. I lowered the microphone and placed it gently back onto the chrome stand. The quiet thud, finalizing the absolute destruction of their fabricated world. I stood at the edge of the stage and looked down at the pathetic remnants of my broken family. There was no yelling coming from my lips. There were no angry tears streaming down my face. I did not feel the need to scream or rage or demand hollow apologies from people who were fundamentally incapable of offering any genuine remorse. I felt nothing but pure, icy closure washing over my entire spirit. The toxic emotional chains that had bound me to their constant, desperate need for approval were completely and permanently shattered, scattered across the cold marble floor alongside the ashes of their fake generational wealth. I looked at Harrison, who was staring blankly into space. A defeated, completely broken man who had sacrificed his own daughter for a temporary illusion. I looked at Valerie, still weeping pathetically in her velvet chair, mourning the death of her social life rather than the loss of her child. I looked at Aaliyah and Connor, two arrogant frauds finally facing the terrifying, inescapable reality of utter poverty. They had built their entire shiny kingdom on malicious lies, and I had simply pulled the single financial thread that unraveled it all. I turned my attention away from the wreckage and looked at my two towering corporate lawyers standing faithfully by the silver tray that held the eviction notice and the asset seizure warrants. "We are done here," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute finality that echoed softly in the aftermath of the devastation. "Let the bailiffs handle the rest." I stepped down from the stage and turned my back on my screaming, weeping family, walking slowly and purposefully out the grand oak doors. I turned my back on the smoking ruins of the Williams family legacy and began the long, deliberate walk down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. Behind me, the devastating symphony of their absolute ruin echoed against the crystal chandeliers. Valerie's agonizing sobs carried over the crowd, mingling with Aaliyah's hysterical hyperventilating and Harrison's furious, panicked shouting. It was a chaotic, pathetic chorus of people who had finally been violently stripped of their precious illusions. But I did not slow my pace or turn my head to look at them one last time. As I approached the massive, heavy oak doors, my security detail smoothly stepped forward to push them open, revealing the serene, brightly lit expanse of the luxury hotel lobby. I stepped over the threshold, and the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me, instantly cutting off the frantic screaming and reducing the catastrophic meltdown to a dull, muffled hum. The contrast between the absolute hellscape I had just left inside that ballroom and the profound, exquisite tranquility of the empty lobby was breathtaking. Gentle classical music played softly from hidden speakers, completely undisturbed by the financial slaughter that had just occurred mere feet away. My black stiletto heels clicked against the polished marble floors in a slow, steady rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock, marking the final seconds of their fake empire. The hotel staff standing near the reception desks immediately straightened their posture as I walked past, bowing their heads in deep, silent respect for the woman who had just commanded their general manager to bend the knee. I walked with my shoulders pulled back and my head held high, the blood-red Tom Ford suit moving flawlessly with every single step I took. There was no rush in my stride, no adrenaline-fueled sprint to escape the scene of the crime. I glided across the lavish lobby with the absolute serene confidence of an apex predator that had just finished a highly satisfying meal. The crushing, suffocating anxiety that used to paralyze me whenever I was in the same room as my toxic parents was entirely gone, completely replaced by a vast, deep ocean of unshakable peace. I had walked into this building as the ghost of the family scapegoat, but I was walking out as the undeniable architect of their ultimate destruction, and it felt absolutely magnificent. I pushed through the gleaming revolving glass doors at the front entrance of the hotel and stepped out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night. The violent thunderstorm that had washed over the city 24 hours ago, the same freezing rain they had gleefully thrown me into, had completely passed. The sky above the towering skyline was now perfectly clear, and the slick, wet pavement of the valet roundabout reflected the vibrant, glowing city lights like a massive dark mirror. The crisp air filled my lungs, tasting incredibly fresh and entirely devoid of the suffocating toxic perfume of the society elites I had just destroyed. My driver was already standing by the curb, holding the rear door of the custom black Mercedes Maybach wide open for me. The hotel valets rushed forward trying to offer their assistance, but my personal security detail smoothly waved them away, ensuring I had an absolute clear path to the luxury vehicle. I stepped into the spacious cabin, sinking down into the incredibly soft, heated cream leather seats. My lead attorney gave me a brief, respectful nod before moving to the sleek black SUV parked directly behind my car, taking the signed eviction notice and the asset seizure warrants with him to begin the final legal executions. The heavy door of the Maybach swung shut with a solid, comforting thud, completely sealing me inside my own private, impenetrable fortress of wealth and security. The soundproof partition was already raised, providing me with total isolation. I leaned my head back against the plush headrest, turning my face toward the tinted window. The neon lights of the Buckhead Financial District washed over my skin, painting my reflection in alternating shades of gold and deep crimson. I sat there in the perfect quiet, waiting for the familiar heavy sting of familial guilt to creep into my chest, but it never came. There was no remorse for evicting my parents or bankrupting my arrogant brother-in-law. There was only the profound, staggering physical sensation of a 31-year-old burden finally being lifted from my weary shoulders. The decades of deep emotional manipulation, the constant agonizing comparisons to my golden sister, the relentless, desperate struggle to earn the approval of a father who only saw me as a failure, all of it simply evaporated into the cool night air. I was completely and utterly free from the crushing weight of their fake black excellence, and I had never felt lighter in my entire life. I looked at the reflection of my own calm, satisfied face in the dark glass of the luxury vehicle, completely at peace with the absolute devastation I had just unleashed upon the people who shared my blood. I pressed the intercom button connecting me to the front cabin of the silent waiting car. "Take me home," I instructed my driver, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying the effortless weight of total victory. The powerful engine of the Maybach purred to life, incredibly quiet, but undeniably dominant, as the long black car smoothly pulled away from the curb and merged into the glowing Atlanta traffic, leaving the luxury hotel and the shattered remains of the Williams family entirely behind me. Just as the car merged onto the highway, the encrypted smartphone resting on the empty leather seat next to me began to vibrate aggressively. The sharp, relentless buzzing cut through the deep silence of the cabin. The dark screen suddenly illuminated, casting a bright, harsh light across the soft cream leather. I glanced down and watched as the notifications began to rapidly stack up on the locked display, pouring in at a frantic, desperate pace. The screen flashed violently with a continuous stream of familiar names lighting up the dark interior of the car. Aaliyah, Harrison, Valerie, Connor. The begging had officially begun. The next morning arrived with a brilliant, blinding clarity that seemed to wash away decades of heavy, toxic smog. Golden sunlight poured generously through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my Buckhead penthouse, illuminating the sleek, modern furniture and casting long, elegant shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. The city of Atlanta stretched out infinitely beneath me, completely oblivious to the absolute seismic shift that had occurred within its elite social circles just hours before. I woke up naturally, without the harsh, jarring sound of an alarm, feeling a profound, deep-seated peace radiating through every single fiber of my being. The heavy, crushing anxiety that usually accompanied my mornings, the deeply ingrained fear of not being enough, of failing to meet Harrison's impossible standards or Valerie's shallow social metrics had completely evaporated into the crisp morning air. I slipped out of the luxurious silk sheets of my king-sized bed, wrapping a plush cashmere robe tightly around my shoulders. My bare feet moved silently across the cool marble of the master bathroom and out into the expansive open-concept kitchen. I walked with the slow, measured grace of a woman who had finally reclaimed her entire existence. I pressed a hidden button on the smart home console, and the soft, intricate melodies of a Bach cello suite began to drift smoothly from the hidden surround sound speakers. The rich, complex music filled the quiet, cavernous space, creating a perfect atmosphere of absolute, untouchable tranquility. I walked over to the custom kitchen island and began the precise, methodical process of brewing a pour-over coffee. I measured the expensive, dark-roasted beans with careful, exact movements, grinding them perfectly before slowly pouring the steaming hot water over the fresh grounds in a slow, mesmerizing spiral. The rich, dark aroma of the coffee bloomed in the quiet penthouse, mixing flawlessly with the classical music echoing off the glass walls. I stood there simply breathing in the morning, watching the dark liquid slowly drip into my favorite ceramic mug, completely present in the beautiful, serene reality I had built with my own two hands. It was a morning of pure, unadulterated triumph, a quiet celebration of my hard-won independence and absolute total freedom from their suffocating grip. I picked up the ceramic mug, letting the comforting heat seep into my palms, and finally walked over to the velvet sofa, where I had carelessly tossed my encrypted smartphone the night before. The device lay there silently, its dark screen hiding the desperate, frantic chaos of the people I had just ruined. I tapped the screen, and the display immediately lit up, illuminating the sheer magnitude of their absolute panic. A bright red notification bubble hovered aggressively over my call log, displaying the staggering number 57. 57 missed calls from the exact same people who had practically laughed while pushing me out into a freezing thunderstorm just a few days ago. The names stacked up on the glowing screen in a continuous, desperate pattern. Harrison, Valerie, Aelia, Connor, and even a few panicked calls from Aunt Brenda, who was clearly terrified of being included in the financial slaughter. I tapped on the voicemail icon and selected the most recent message left by my mother Valerie, just 3 hours ago in the dead of night. Her voice crackled through the phone speaker, thick with heavy dramatic sobs and the unmistakable sound of sheer, suffocating terror. "Sienna, please pick up the phone," Valerie wept, her voice stripped of all its usual polished country club arrogance. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot take the house, Sienna. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. You have to remember that." She went on rambling hysterically about forgiveness and how God commands us to honor our parents completely, ignoring the decades of deep emotional abuse she had actively participated in. She cried about how her friends at the church would never look at her the same way again, proving that even in her darkest moment, her biggest fear was losing her fake reputation. I pulled the phone away from my ear, looking at the screen as a notification for a new text message popped up from Aelia. The golden child was already desperately trying to save her own skin by viciously turning on her white finance bro husband. "Sienna, it is all Connor's fault." Aelia typed her words, reeking of pathetic, desperate self-preservation. "He lied to me about everything. He hid the debts, and I had absolutely no idea he was scamming Mom and Dad, I swear. Please do not take my cars. Please, Sienna, I am your little sister. I will divorce him today if you just stop the asset seizure and give me a monthly allowance." I read the frantic, pathetic text message from the sister who had just told me I did not belong in high society, and I realized something incredibly profound. I felt absolutely nothing for any of them. The deep, visceral anger that had fueled my silent rise to power, the lingering sorrow of being the unloved scapegoat, the desperate lingering hope that they might one day see my true worth, all of it was completely gone. Their tears, their begging, their desperate attempts to manipulate my emotions, using the toxic illusion of family loyalty, fell entirely flat against the absolute armor of my indifference. They were nothing more than strangers to me now, pathetic strangers drowning in the consequences of their own supreme vanity. I did not even bother listening to the rest of Valerie's hysterical weeping or Aelia's selfish promises. I pressed the delete button, wiping her fake, desperate apologies from my device permanently without even finishing the audio file. I highlighted the entire list of 57 missed calls and cleared the log without a single second of hesitation, erasing their panic from my life. The classical music continued to play softly in the background as I took a slow, satisfying sip of my dark coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I tapped the screen one last time, opening the Instagram application. It was time to close the loop. I set my ceramic coffee mug down on the cool marble island, watching the dark liquid ripple slightly from the motion. I reached out and picked up my encrypted smartphone, unlocking the screen with a swift, effortless swipe. The notification center was an absolute chaotic graveyard of broken egos and shattered pride. 57 missed calls stacked in a glowing red column, representing hours of relentless, frantic dialing. I scrolled slowly through the logs, reading the timeline of their total descent into madness. Harrison had called first, his initial voicemails dripping with his usual aggressive authority, demanding I answer the phone and fix the public embarrassment I had caused. But as the night wore on, and the reality of his impending eviction set in his tone had violently shifted into pathetic, trembling begs. He left voicemails offering to negotiate his own departure, begging me not to humiliate him in front of his former bank colleagues. Valerie had sent a staggering wall of text messages relying heavily on religious guilt and maternal manipulation, pleading with me to remember the Bible and honor my parents completely, ignoring the fact that she had thrown me out into a freezing storm just 5 days prior. Then came Aaliyah's messages, a beautiful, poetic display of absolute betrayal. My golden sister had sent over 20 rapid-fire texts entirely throwing her white finance bro husband under the bus. She typed frantically that Connor was a complete fraud, that he had manipulated her into a fake marriage, and that she was willing to file for divorce this very morning, if I would just let her stay in the ancestral mansion and keep her designer cars. And sitting right at the very bottom of the notification pile was a string of deeply humiliated messages from Trey. The arrogant ex-boyfriend who had laughed at my supposed homelessness was now groveling on his digital knees, begging for a second chance to pitch his failing startup, pleading with me not to trigger the SEC audit that would guarantee his federal prison sentence. I looked at this massive digital mosaic of their absolute terror. I did not feel a single ounce of empathy or lingering family loyalty. I simply pressed the side buttons on my device, capturing pristine high-definition screenshots of every single pathetic begging message and every single desperate missed call log. I documented their entire panicked meltdown, preserving their ultimate humiliation with cold, mechanical precision. The people who had laughed at my packed luggage were now weeping into my inbox, and I was going to make sure the entire city of Atlanta knew exactly what had happened. I opened the Instagram application, the bright interface glowing against the modern backdrop of my quiet penthouse. The same digital platform they had weaponized to publicly execute my character just 5 short days ago was now resting firmly in my hands, loaded with the heavy artillery of their own destruction. I tapped the camera icon to create a new story, selecting the gallery of screenshots I had just captured. I carefully arranged the images on the screen overlapping Harrison's, pathetic begging texts with Aaliyah's, desperate betrayal of her husband, creating a beautiful, undeniable collage of their complete financial and social slaughter. Right in the center of the screen, I placed the massive list of the 57 missed calls highlighting the sheer pathetic volume of their panic. I tapped the text tool, the cursor blinking steadily over the evidence of their ruin. I did not type out an angry rant or a defensive paragraph. I did not need to explain the complex private equity acquisitions or the legal evictions to the general public. The silence and the screenshots spoke volumes louder than any explanation ever could. I simply typed out a single brutal sentence that mirrored the exact cruel caption Aliyah had used to mock my departure. The 31-year-old leech is busy today. Please leave a message at the tone. The words sat there crisp and lethal, a perfect poetic full circle of absolute justice. Then I moved to the tagging feature, ensuring that there was absolutely no escape from the blast radius of this public humiliation. I typed in Aliyah's handle, linking her directly to the post. I typed in Connor's handle, ensuring his remaining fake finance friends would see his wife's text messages throwing him to the wolves. I typed in Trey's handle, so all the tech investors he had been bragging to would see him groveling to the woman he claimed was ambitionless. And finally, I typed in Aunt Brenda's handle, making sure the loudest gossip in the family was forcefully tied to the public sinking of the Williams ship. I took one final look at the digital masterpiece. It was raw, flawless, and entirely devastating. Without a single second of hesitation, I pressed the publish button. The upload ring spun for a brief moment before the story went live, blasting out into the digital feeds of the exact same Atlanta elite circle who had gleefully laughed at my expense earlier this week. I sat there watching the view, metrics begin to climb almost instantaneously. Within seconds, the numbers skyrocketed as the wealthy church ladies, the prominent politicians, and the local socialites opened the notification and gasped at the stunning reversal of fortune. The carefully constructed facade of Black excellence, the flawless, untouchable image of the Williams family legacy, was instantly incinerated in the blinding light of the truth. Their country club friends were now reading Aliyah begging to abandon her husband to save her cars. They were reading Harrison begging his previously disowned daughter not to take his mansion. The narrative was permanently, violently altered. The elite megachurch pastors, the country club board members, the charity gala organizers, every single person who had praised Valerie's tough love post was now staring at the undeniable proof that the Williams family was a complete and total fraud. There was no coming back from this level of public social execution. They had wanted to use the internet to make me a laughingstock, and I had just used it to permanently cement their legacy as the most pathetic frauds in the entire city. I navigated to the profile settings, moving through the digital menus with absolute chilling finality. I opened Valerie's profile, ignoring the glossy fake photos of her recent charity luncheons, and firmly pressed the red block button, confirming the action without a single blink. I moved to Harrison's profile, severing the connection to the man who had thrown a crumpled $100 bill at my chest. Block. I opened Aliyah's page, silencing the golden sister who had mocked my tears. Block. I wiped out Connor, Trey, and Aunt Brenda in rapid succession, cutting their digital lifelines and permanently locking them out of my universe. I swiped down on my control panel and toggled the phone into absolute do not disturb mode, silencing the device completely. I tossed the sleek smartphone face down onto the cool marble counter, entirely severing my connection to the toxic wasteland of my former family. The heavy, suffocating chains of the past 31 years dissolved completely, leaving behind an expansive, brilliant void of limitless potential. I picked up my ceramic mug and turned my back to the kitchen, walking slowly toward the massive panoramic windows of the penthouse. The morning sun bathed my face in a warm golden light, casting a radiant glow over the sprawling Atlanta skyline stretching out endlessly beneath me. I took a long, slow sip of the rich, dark coffee, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue as a genuine, deep-seated smile finally spread across my face. The victory was absolute. The closure was permanent, and the profound silence of my luxury apartment was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I walked over to my modern glass desk and smoothly opened my sleek laptop, the screen springing to life with the crisp charts and graphs of a brand new global market analysis. A fresh, multi-million-dollar acquisition target awaited my executive approval. The past was completely dead and the future belonged entirely to me. The most profound lesson from this journey is that your true worth is never defined by the people who consistently underestimate you. When toxic family members try to shrink your existence to fit their fragile narratives, the ultimate victory is not found in screaming matches or tearful explanations. It is found in silent, relentless execution. Building your own empire gives you the ultimate power of choice. Walking away from people who only love conditionally is not a failure. It is the highest form of self-respect. True liberation happens when you stop begging for a seat at their table and buy the entire building instead. Share this story with someone who needs the courage to walk away from toxicity and start building their own empire today.